We are here with the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, and we are going to go on to speak with another area that you have tremendous responsibility for, and that is the carrier which I depend on to take me anywhere in the region that I need to go, that is LIAT. I've heard you speak very, very favorably, give support to LIAT, ask for other people to support LIAT, but I'm sure, Dr. Gonsalves, you can't step away from this disaster which has happened with LIAT. And I do refer to it as a disaster because I think when children get lost, when parents don't know where children are, when people have to sit in airport for days and can't get to where they want to go, these things are disasters.
Why do you have a penchant for worst case scenarios and call this thing a disaster?
It is.
No, I don't think it is a disaster. There are challenges, there are serious problems, and LIAT in the last couple of weeks have undoubtedly failed the people. But that is an entirely different business than saying it is a disaster. LIAT still travels, takes people to 22 destinations across this region. And they do about 1,000 flights a week.
Still?
The shareholder, I'm answering you. The shareholder governments took a decision, which is a decision which was well rehearsed and sensible, to replace the aging fleet, the Dash 8 300s, the 50-seaters Dash 8 plane, with 50-seaters and 70-seaters from the ATR. The pilots were sent to Toulouse, France to train for the ATRs. The pilots who were trained for the ATR can't, having been licensed to fly the ATR, even though they had hitherto flown the Dash 8 300s, can't go and fly those. So they had to contract pilots. You had therefore a mismatch between the number of pilots available and an overabundance of pilots available for the ATRs and just about enough for the Dash 8s because they had to even hire contract pilots. The management planned the matter in a way expecting the resources from the three major shareholder governments, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and Dominica came in also. They did not receive from the shareholder governments the monies required for the equity from the shareholder governments. I must say this, that the government of St. Vincent and Grenadines paid its equity participation for both year 1 and year 2 of the refleeting. Some other shareholders did not pay their monies on time, which meant the expectation of the management that more ATR planes would be delivered sooner. What didn't happen? 2 were delivered.
Can I just stick on a point here?
Yeah.
What was the schedule for the arrival at the ATRs?
It should have happened earlier than it did. I don't have the actual month. All I can tell you broadly, they should have been delivered earlier.
But by now, the total fleet should have been in the region?
No, never. The total fleet should be in the region by the end of 2014. By the end of January, you will have 7 of the 12. 2 have been delivered, another one this week would be delivered, and bit by bit, and therefore the situation would improve. So
it's on schedule as it is happening now?
Yes. So what transpired, my dear sister, is this. Some of the older planes, the Dash 8 300s, which the average age is about 20 years, and some broke down. In fact, one of the new planes had a particular problem. It's something you may buy a new car and something highly technical thing, computerized, something may go wrong with it. It's down for a week until the people get it right. All of these factors caused a lateness. Other factors intervened too. Some workers in the LIAT system have not been as disciplined as they should have been. And some service providers. You take, for instance, one morning, the very morning I was leaving St. Vincent to go and sign the $65 million US loan from CDB. I was on the plane, 6 o'clock to take off. But the night before, about 11 passengers, because the flight arrived very late, had to stay in St. Vincent. But the taxi operators whom they hired to get this 11 passengers, rather than bringing the people at 5, they brought them at 6. So we were there in the plane. No, that wasn't LIAT's immediate cause of that immediate problem. That was some service providers. But of course, if you're late for 40 minutes on one aircraft coming out of St. Vincent, it's going to have a knock-on effect for the rest of the day. And then, simple examples. If a Dash 8 flight comes into Grenada at 11:30, 12 o'clock the night when it should be here at 10:30, and leave in the morning at 6 o'clock. If it arrives at 12:30, it can't leave at 6 o'clock unless you flew in other pilots on that very plane, because those pilots, they have a mandatory period during which they have to rest before they take on the morning shift. And there are these problems. LIAT management ought properly to have explained the potential problems of the transition, so that the public, it wouldn't shock the public. And clearly, this is a matter which we, the shareholders and the management themselves, they have acknowledged that they erred in not informing people on a timely basis. I want to say this broadly. LIAT gets a lot of knocks. And during the last several weeks, they deserve many of the knocks. But without LIAT, this region will come to a halt. And there are 3 governments. Now Dominica has come on in a smaller way.
St. Lucia has promised to come on.
Yes, these are 3 governments which have borne the burden.
And could I
just think what would happen without it. That is no excuse for a poor service, but I'm putting the whole thing within the context. The assurance which I will give your viewers, though, is that as we move towards January, and as more of the ATR planes come on, the anticipation, the reasonable expectation is that we'll have fewer of these kinds of challenges.
Okay, so a few things here. So the situation as it is now, with the long delays, that is expected to continue until January?
No. Progressively, it should be getting better, because you're not getting, it's not a question that you have 2 planes now, 2 of the new ones, and you wait until the end of January to get 5. You're getting them in stages. For instance, this week I've been advised another ATR, the 72 should come. So that between now and January, we should have a total of 7. Now, if you have 7 and 4 or 5 of them are ATR 72s, the 70-seaters, it means that you're going to have the bulk of your fleet, the majority of the carrying load in place by the end of January.
Okay, a couple of things, Dr. Gonsalves. You mentioned that the workers, some of them, have not been as disciplined as they should have during this period. Where has the union been in all of this? Because we've heard the union quite vocal in LIAT operations many times. Where have they been?
The unions have spoken, but I believe that the union leadership also would be concerned, and the bulk of the workers would be concerned about workers, some employees who have not pulled their weight. And I just want to say this. All the employees I'm talking about are not necessarily employees of LIAT directly. Some are service providers, because there are some airports in the region, including some important ones, where there's a contract for a service, not LIAT directly, not directly LIAT's employees.
Okay. Dr. Gonsalves, please hold that thought. Viewers, we're on Time to Talk with Dr. Ralph Gonsalves. We take a short break and we'll be right back. Talk with Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, the Prime Minister of neighboring St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Dr. Gonsalves, before we went on the break, we were speaking about the union's role, where the workers, as you said, were not as disciplined as they should be. Some of them. And we want to keep it in the context of the workers within LIAT, some of whom would be represented by unions. Have the unions made any intervention at all to help with this situation? That's the first question. And the second part, if workers are not behaving properly, isn't it a function of the management to ensure that these workers do their jobs the way they're supposed to?
Yes, I don't want to paint a brush where it's a general condition that the LIAT workers are not performing well. Why I said some workers, for instance, in some of the small airports at an early flight, you should have, let's say you have a 6 o'clock flight. You should have 2 persons at the desk at 5 o'clock. Because it's going to take 2 persons to check in 45, 50 passengers within an hour. Because you may check them in there within the hour if it's 1 person. Or 1 person comes half an hour late. You may be able to check them in within the hour. But people have to go to immigration and they have to do the security checks. They're obviously not going to be able to do it within the time. Things like that I'm talking about. And then I've gotten a lot of reports that some LIAT staff have not been as helpful to customers as they should be. They would give information which is misleading. They may give information which is not wholly truthful. These things only infuriate passengers. I personally would like somebody to say to me, look, Ralph, this plane is going to be 3 hours late. The way I see it, it's going to be 3 hours late. If you tell me it's going to be 3 hours late, I'm on terra firma. I may decide if I have to do something nearby somewhere, I will go and do it and come back. Or I may go with a partner, buy a restaurant, have a good meal, or have a drink, we'll talk, whatever we do in the Caribbean. What is not helpful is when you tell somebody, okay, we're going to be moving in half an hour. and we'll get an announcement. Half an hour becomes an hour, you get no announcement. I mean, I've seen mothers with their children and young children getting very antsy. They can't wait, they don't have the patience of you and I. So these are some of the things I'm talking about which add to the problems. Right. In mitigation, I must say this.
But before we go to the mitigation, Dr. Gonsalves, this is the reason I asked the question, if staff are not performing their functions as they should, isn't it management's responsibility to put systems in place to ensure that the staff do their jobs?
Yes, that is true. But at the end of the day, you have individual responsibilities. You know, you're in the news business. You might be in even a managerial position. Sometimes you talk, you put systems in place, but human beings individually have to do the work. So every time somebody doesn't do it,
you have to deal with it.
You deal with it, but you don't fire them, you deal with them. And these are there are a series of management techniques in dealing with that, and I'm quite sure that it happens. I was making the point in mitigation. I want to say this about the staff of LIAT. You know, I have seen them, they're human beings. I have seen that the very delays themselves tire them. The bombarding of people and persons, they get to the airport, they have to make connections, they are irate. And the staff, they're helpless. They can't do anything because a lot of the stuff is outside of their control. And sometimes you need the patience of Job and the foresight of a Hebrew prophet to deal with some circumstances. I am not, as you notice, I am trying to give as best as I can, not just as the chairman of the shareholders of LIAT, but as somebody who travels a lot on LIAT, and more than that, somebody who is very much in touch with people. And I get a lot of complaints. I mean, I do house-to-house campaign in my house-to-house visit in my constituency. And I'd go to homes, and people say to me, "Comrade, this thing with LIAT, man, explain this thing to me." And they get very angry and very upset, so that I know, I understand the pain, I understand the complaints, and I'm not trying to minimize any of it. I explain it, and I believe the real structural issue has to do with the delivery on time of these new planes. Look, the old planes, they break down, and you have to spend a lot of money maintaining, and you know, this investment is over $100 million US.
But as you mentioned, the old planes, I must commend that St. Vincent pilot, Romel de Freitas, well, a first officer, Romel de Freitas, who brought in that plane which lost a wheel from Guyana.
You have very good pilots.
I think he should, well, if it's one thing LIAT can stand on, is its record of safety.
They have very good pilots.
And I think First Officer de Freitas deserves a medal, in my view.
They are very good. They are very good pilots.
For really taking that plane down without any incident. And these are the success stories of LIAT. But
the truth of the matter is this: there's a significant number of the persons who are either service providers for LIAT or workers, employees of LIAT, who are imbued with a sense of modernity and competitiveness and the like. But there are some, we have to acknowledge, which still have a lethargic view and as part of an old culture which we are seeking to change.
Dr. Gonsalves, if staff are not performing, especially if they're consistent in not performing, I still maintain it's a function of management to set it right. But do you support the view that with everything that has been happening with LIAT, I call it a disaster, you prefer to use other words, that is fine. But what we know is that things have not been going right. Do you agree with those who have been calling for a change in the management of LIAT? Or do you agree with Dr. Holder that this group of people there are the only ones who can do it?
Well, I never believe in only ones, because no human being is indispensable. To be fair to Captain Brunton, he has just taken over about less than
Just
a year.
about a year. August 1st was a year.
So you have to give him a chance to mold his team.
For most people, probation is 3 months, you know.
Yes, but I mean, this is a complicated business. Running, you know, my dear sister.
So we need people who understand
Think-
complicated matters.
No, well, he's an experienced airline manager. You see, having an airline like LIAT, which is doing short stops, and you're doing 1,000 flights a week, it is not an easy operation at the best of times. And in a context where you had these problems when they're transitioning from one set of aircraft to another, and given the problems which I outlined at the rate at which they were getting the new planes, it made it real problematic for them.
Right. And that is why I asked if the arrival of the new planes were on schedule. Because if it is on schedule, then we should not be having these problems. Because the schedule should have been made to handle this. If it's not on schedule, then the problems that come up.
Had LIAT received, had the management received all the requisite resources at the time when they anticipated those resources, I don't think you would have had the problem to the extent that you have it. But I'm very hopeful that with the 65 million US dollars which has come due from CDB, that what the management has told the shareholders, that between now and the end of January, the first 7 of the planes would be delivered. And as every time another one is delivered, it eases the problem.
But, you know, you mentioned Captain Brunton, and when he took over as CEO last year, one of the things which was said is Captain Brunton will join a panel of creative thinkers and doers seeking to identify solutions to a problem which has plagued the Caribbean travelers for a number of years.
Yes.
Right. So what has happened since he took over? We've seen a deterioration in the service that LIAT provides rather than an improvement.
No, but I just explained to you the context in which the difficulties have arisen. I don't want to go over that.
So it's not a fault of the management, any of this?
No, I don't see. I have to get the compelling evidence that the management themselves had made errors which have been errors which have not been forced, that they have made these errors out of their own negligence or their own inadvertence. That information has not come to me. I have persons on the board of directors. Each of us has representatives on the board. And I think there's a good board. And I don't believe that those who represent St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I know the 2 persons who are there. One is my permanent secretary in the Ministry of Air Transportation in St. Vincent, National Security, an excellent public servant, very experienced, very knowledgeable. And the other one, who used to be the budget director, and who is now the local manager of Royal Bank, RBTT. Persons of this quality, they will give me reports, and I will read the documentation. So I'm not in the in the vanguard of those who are saying chop management. I am usually careful until I see evidence which I will consider persuasive, if not compelling. And I talk about this, I talk in this way from somebody who has been involved in political activity for now 45 years and who has been around as Prime Minister now for almost 13 years. So I approach these matters with clarity, robustly, but nevertheless measured.
Good. So do you attribute, or in your own assessment, even outside of empirical black and white data in front of you, Captain Brunton has said LIAT has a serious communication problem.
Yes.
Which is one of the failures of management, which is not forced.
Yes.
So outside of that data, which you would want to see, what could management do at this point to improve the situation as it is?
Well, I think what they have to do is the resources which are at their disposal, and it's an airline, we're talking about the planes, to use the resources at their disposal as in the best possible way to service the 22 jurisdictions. They have said, Captain Brunton has made the point, and I believe it to be the case, that as the new planes arrive, delivered one by one, you would have less and less problems, because that is the fundamental issue. You need planes to take you from here, from Grenada to St. Vincent, which are in very good working condition. You need additional capacity, which the 70-seaters will give you, which the newer planes will give you, less frequent breakdowns, and the like.
Dr. Gonsalves, again, we are going to be taking a short break. Viewers, please stay with us on Time to Talk. We'll be right back.